Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How's everybody today? Today we have the sun shining here, so obviously it's going to be a great day.
Right. And so the sun has been shining for 3 days now, which is good actually. And so for those of you that live in Texas, y'all know what I mean. Y'all haven't seen the sun in a while, but yeah, we're seeing the sun for 3 days now, at least up here in Central Texas. But today, what we're going to... all right, we're World Paranormal Research Society. The website's worldparanormalresearchsociety.org, O-R-G. And the YouTube channel is World Paranormal Research Society. So today, we're going to talk about horror. Horror in forms of books, movies, and music. So let's start talking about books. So you want to talk about Bram Stoker.
Well, one of my favorite horror characters of all time, other than Boris Karloff, the Mummy, is Dracula. And we all know Dracula. There's been several versions of the retelling of the story of Dracula. But my favorite version, of course, is Bram Stoker's Dracula. And just to give you a little bit of history on this particular piece of horror literature, Dracula is it's considered a Gothic novel. So it's 1897 Gothic novel by Irish author Bram Stoker. So he was Irish, and it really introduced the world to Count Dracula, and he really set the stage, and he sort of established many trains of thought or conventions of subsequent vampire fantasies. So he really brought the character of a vampire into the fantasy world, or to the fantasy of various people. And the novel really tells the story of Dracula's attempt to move from Transylvania to England, so basically he could find new blood to suck on and spread his undead curse. And it becomes the novel becomes really a battle between good and evil, and it's a battle between Dracula and a very small group of men and a woman led by Professor Abraham Van Helsing. And we know that Van Helsing, there's been another movie about Van Helsing, but Abraham Van Helsing is sort of the heroine in this particular movie. And the publication date of this Gothic novel was May 26th, 1897. So very, very instrumental into setting the stage. And again, this particular novel has really spawned numerous theatrical, film, and television interpretations of his particular novel. And that's just my all-time favorite. And it's really it's sort of a series of he's thrown a series of diary entries, newspaper articles, ship logs, and different narratives into this particular novel. And it really, the chronological date of this particular novel, largely in England and Transylvania during the 1890s. And very instrumental. And then we talk about the main character again is Jonathan Harker, and in Bram Stoker's Dracula, the film version, Francis Ford Coppola, we know that Jonathan Harker is played by Keanu Reeves, and he's
well, we're not talking about films, we're just referring to
the novel. Yes,
books right now. We'll get into films a little bit later. Yeah.
But what the story is, what Bram Stoker's story is that Jonathan Harker is a newly qualified English solicitor, or in our terms, lawyer or attorney, and he's actually visiting Count Dracula in the Carpathian Mountains on the border of Transylvania, Moldavia, and he's there to provide legal support for him to buy or purchase up. What Dracula wants to do is he wants to purchase up some prime real estate in and around London. So Renfield was actually the solicitor that was prior to Jonathan Harker, but he went insane, he went mad. So Jonathan Harker, and the story goes into how Jonathan Harker is in Transylvania. He's asked to stay there for a month to learn some of the Count's customs and to tutor the Count on English customs, so he'll be familiar with England. He's never been to England. And the story goes on to, he has 3 female vampires that are there that suck Jonathan Harker dry slowly but slowly prior to him escaping. So in a sense, he is Dracula's prisoner. Dracula gets on a boat and sails to England, and he meets up with Jonathan Harker's fiancée, who is said to be a reincarnation of the princess that was actually married to Dracula. So it's really, to me, a true gothic horror novel in the sense of the word, that it takes place in a time that is very gothic, Transylvania. It has all the ingredients of gothic in my mind: dark, dreary, there's castles, there's a English abbey in there. So the environment that the novel sets the stage, it really takes the reader back to that time, and it really makes you think that you're really there. And I encourage you really to read this version. Again, he really set the stage for theatrical, movie, and other tellings of the same historical character. And as we know, Count Dracula is based on the historic figure of Vlad the Impaler. So I don't know if you want to add anything about Dracula, but there's been many movies from this particular Bram Stoker's, to me, is an ingenious piece of early horror literature.
Yeah, what I'd like to add to that is that I wrote a book called Vlad the Impaler, Vlad 3, written by Timothy Mark. You go to Amazon.com or go to BarnesandNobles.com. You can get that book. And it's a very good book, and so I'd recommend it for anybody who's a Dracula fan. I don't even know how I can follow you on that one, because you did such a good thing.
It's interesting to know, when I was talking about theatrical versions of Dracula, a little historical tidbit for all you Bram Stoker's fans, that between 1879 and 1898, Bram Stoker was a business manager at the Lyceum Theatre in London, and he actually supplemented his income by writing a large number of sensational novels, and of course his most successful being the vampire tale Dracula. And he did use the towns of Whitby in London as he actually spent his summer holidays in Whitby, and you'll recall that part of his novel takes you to Whitby as well. So he incorporated locations that he himself was holidaying or vacation at in his particular novel. And it really, to me, I think it really, when I read Bram Stoker's Dracula when I was a youth, it really takes you into that gritty kind of appeal of what was going on in Victorian London, and it really is gritty. And
I'm laughing
at that
because
time,
I don't know how the hell I can follow you on this one. You good? I should just let you do the Frankenstein one too.
No, but you know what? When I consider a real gothic horror movie that's going to be a real cult classic or a novel, you want that grit, you want that horror, but you want that sex appeal. And Bram Stoker in the Victorian times was able to incorporate gothic horror, grit, and sexuality at a time when maybe people weren't allowed to speak of it, but people were really in awe. And I think his novel really gave a different spin on the historic figure of Vlad the Impaler. It kind of opened up a different dimension on how you looked at this, this and Vlad the Impaler.
What year was was Bram Stoker's Dracula written again?
I believe I just said that at the beginning here.
But,
actually, the publication date was May 26, 1897. So we're just on the cornerstone of a new century.
But it's way after Vlad. Vlad existed first, so I'm kind of wondering if Bram Stoker actually wrote that after hearing stories about Vlad.
Well, it's said, and when I was doing, I did in the past, like I said, I was in various literature clubs, book clubs. We would actually strip down historical novels and dissect them, and it has been said that Bram Stoker did take Vlad the Impaler and sort of change and alter and instead of making him, a brutal impaler, he wanted to give it a real, like I said, that gothic, gritty, sexual spin to a historic figure that did live.
Okay, folks, Alexandria definitely knows what she's talking about when it comes to Dracula. It's her favorite thing to talk about. The book that I'm going to talk about is Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was written by. She was 18 years old when she wrote Frankenstein. I'm not going to be able to give you the breakdown on it just like Alexandria did on Bram Stoker. But what I will say is that think about it like this: she was 18 years old. I believe I don't even remember what year she wrote the book. In 1818. So January 1st, 1818, Mary Shelley, at the age of 18, wrote Frankenstein. Now we know electricity did not exist in 1818. So this is an argument, or not an argument, but a debate that I just had with Alexandria, where we have to acknowledge the fact that the Frankenstein story as we know it, with Frankenstein being brought back to life with electricity, was not the way that it was originally told. Actually, even me saying Frankenstein brought back to life is not right either, because Frankenstein the monster was never called Frankenstein. It was just called the monster or the creature. The doctor's name was Frankenstein. So Frankenstein is actually about the doctor. So the monster that was brought back to life was just called the monster or the creature. In later years, people justified calling it Frankenstein because, people screwed it up and they could never get it right. They would just always refer to it as Frankenstein and said, okay, well, if you had a kid, your kid would be named after you. So this is Frankenstein's creation, so it was to be named after him, so it took on the name Frankenstein. Although it was never written to be that way. Also, Thomas Edison proves that when we'll talk about films in a little bit later, when he done his movie Frankenstein. Frankenstein actually came to life. He was in a vat of liquid, and you said there was smoke falling down on him or something, right?
Yeah, I seen the clip of that because I was quite interested. Timothy has spoken of Thomas Edison's film at great length, and it really inspired my curiosity. And as a historian, I like to I pay attention to small details, and I notice in that particular edited or the one that wasn't remastered version.
No. It's not about that now. Now you're going into.
No, I'm talking about the smoke. I'm talking about the smoke. I said the fog. I thought it was some kind of a fog, and it seemed like this fog or mist, when it touched the creature, it seemed to make him come more to life. And maybe that's just my perception of the image. I'm not sure.
I think that movie was done in 1910, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah, and so it was a different way that Frankenstein was to come to life, other than the story the way we know it now. Also, he did not have the square head originally. So that's another thing that Universal took and trademarked, and that's the Frankenstein that we know. But over the years, you've seen different versions of Frankenstein. But so yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is something that I would ask everybody to read. Wrote in 1818 by an 18-year-old girl, Mary Shelley. And I want to talk about Edgar Allan Poe, the second greatest poet that ever lived. Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe is a kind of a folk hero of mine because he, to me, I think he was genius and he was the innovator of very dark and maybe horrific poetry that really tapped into your mind. And maybe I think a lot of his poetry expressed things that maybe a lot of us have going on in our minds and are afraid to put it out there. But he was, he's a very dark character, and I'm a huge admirer of his poetry, such as The Raven and that kind of poetry.
But that's what people know him as a poet. But people don't realize that he was also an author, and he wrote way more
short stories
than he did poetry. Like The Telltale Heart, The Pit and the Pendulum.
Was it The Murder on Rue?
I
can't
no,
remember.
I don't think he did that one. You
I'm not quite
Murder in
sure.
the Rue Morgue?
Yeah.
I don't know, was that a Poe?
I think
poem?
I'm not positive. Maybe somebody out there could correct us on that fact.
Yeah, I don't really know, but he was also a playwright, and he actually did, through his life, he only did one play, one actual play, and so yeah, there's Edgar Allan Poe was definitely someone who wrote.
And what's the time frame of Edgar Allan Poe?
Now that would be 1800s as well.
Why I'm bringing that to the forefront is that through the 1880s and the 1890s there was art.
Poe was way before then. Poe was born in 1809 and died in 1849, so he died at 40 years old. And now that you want to find out, let me just check real quick.
No, but now
Murder in the Rue Morgue is what you call it.
But see that time frame, Mary Shelley's time frame, and Edgar Allan Poe.
That was not a Poe.
Okay.
Murder in the Rue Morgue was not a Poe. Poe did his short stories with The Telltale Heart, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, The Premature Burial, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death, The Gold Bug, The Hot Frog, The Black Cat, and actually a lot of these short stories was performed on screen by Vincent Price.
Right, and Poe has, Vincent Price has read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's poetry on, I've seen different on YouTube, there's different channels that have that. What I was trying to get at is that Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe were actually innovators, because if you look at this time frame, 1880s to 1890s, authors such as H. Rider Haggard, Rudyard Kipling, Robert Louis Stevenson, Arthur Conan Doyle, and H.G. Wells actually wrote tales in which fantastic creatures threaten the British Empire, and it's called invasion literature, because that invasion literature was at its peak. But the thing to know that Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe were before that time, so they were frontiers.
Yeah, they were around the same time. Yeah.
Well, they were before this 1880s and 1890s.
No, they were. Yeah, I'm saying when I say they were the same time,
Yeah.
I'm saying Poe and Shelley lived in the same.
And they
time.
were the frontiers in what they call invasion literature. And I think it's very, very important that Edgar Allan Poe was an American, and all these other ones that I mentioned here were British, and they were their creatures were threatened to invade the British Empire through these fantasies, formulas that they instilled.
But if you ask anybody what their favorite Edgar Allan Poe poem is, they always say The Raven, because The Raven has been made movies about it, and it's the one that people know. Instead of saying their appropriate answer should be, I don't really know many of his poems. The only one I've ever heard of is The Raven, so I guess The Raven would be more accurate. But here's one called The Haunted Palace, and I'd like to just read a line from it, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you so-called Poe fans have never probably even heard of this poem. But it says, this is just two lines from The Haunted Palace. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. I like when he says robes of sorrow. That's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's so Poe definitely
He was very eloquent
coined a lot of phrases
when he described sorrow and things that he was very deep in his wording. He wasn't really what I call a surface writer. He really went to the core of feelings. And before we kind of end this segment, I just wanted to throw this out to you. Like I said, we think that Vlad the Impaler was an inspiration. There's no historical data other than Bram.
Well, I mean, Vlad the Impaler, okay, you're saying what we think. Vlad the Impaler was someone who drank blood of his victims, okay? There is no way in hell Bram Stoker could have wrote Bram Stoker's Dracula without having the man whose last name is Dracula. I mean, let's just think common sense here. Let's just take common sense. Dracula was Vlad's last name. Dracula.
Right.
All right. Bram Stoker wrote a book called Dracula. Common sense dictates Bram Stoker knew of Vlad the Impaler and was a direct influence on his Dracula story.
Well, he had to, because it said that Bram Stoker actually went to studied Romanian history in the background, and he had a lot of historical reference. But one take that I really don't agree with, and this is a theory that has been put out there, and I certainly don't subscribe to it, is a Shakespearean actor and a friend of Stoker, Sir Henry Irving, they say was a possible real-life inspiration for the character of Dracula. The role was tailor-made to his dramatic presence, gentlemanly mannerism, and affinity for playing villain roles. But come on, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, Vlad the Impaler just fits this role to a T, never mind a Shakespearean actor. I mean, there's no mention of this Shakespearean actor drinking blood. Like, I mean, for goodness sakes.
Common sense, again. Vlad's father, Vlad Dracula. Then you have Vlad the Third, who's Vlad the Impaler. It's just, all right, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Vlad Dracula. Vlad Tepes was his name. Tepes was his name, but it was Vlad Dracula is what he was known for a long time before Bram Stoker was ever born. A long time before he was ever a sperm in the nutsack of his dad. That the Vlad lived and died.
And I don't agree with that theory because this Sir Henry...
you don't agree with what theory?
About Sir Henry Irving, and it said that he was supposed to be a close friend, and Irving, however, never agreed to play the part of Dracula on stage. So if your friend is a famous writer, and he writes a story that's supposedly based on some of your characteristics, and you couldn't even be bothered to play the role on stage, something smells very funny or very foul with that story. So that's why I certainly don't subscribe to that particular theory.
It's more important to the fact that Bram Stoker would have used Vlad the Impaler as an influence, being that he used his fucking last name. Am I correct?
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you actually read the novel, and he does use the name Dracula, I mean, come on, and because this is invested in the Order of the Dragon in 1431. Let's get come on.
The Order of the Dragon was what... Okay, let's talk about this for a minute. The order, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, or I can't pronounce his name correctly. It's Tepes. Tepes. Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. His dad's name was Vlad Dracula, Vlad Tepes Dracula. The reason why he had the name Dracula, and this is long before Bram Stoker's Dracula, is because it was the Order of the Dragon. The order, it was knights that fought for Christianity, and so that's why he took on the name Dracula. And what happened was his son took on the name as well. So he was more known as Vlad Dracula. Now this was way before Bram Stoker's Dracula. He utilized his last name in the book. So, and this man drunk blood. He drank the blood of his victims. So we'd just be simply idiots to think that it's not based on Vlad Dracula.
And here's another historical trivia point for all of you in there, that in the old Romanian language, the word Dracul, Romanian Drac means dragon, ul means meant the dragon, and that meant Dracula was the son of the dragon. But in present day, however, Dracul means devil in Romanian. So the Romanian language has mutated itself. The old version means son of the dragon, and today
the old original version. When you take the original version, when you say cup and you define the word cup, and then somebody 300 years later wants to redefine it, it doesn't take away from the original meaning. The original meaning, the original Dracula was Order of the Dragon. It was for Christian knights. People can come along and redo it or try to give it a different definition. It does not change the original definition of the meaning of the word.
It's just been mutated through time. That's how I look at it. It's been changed,
used
altered, and it's a shame when things change from their original meaning. Modernization sometimes is not a good thing.
Ignorance. People that don't research or want to know what the word Dracula means or what it had meant in the past. So it's kind of no different than the pentagram. The pentagram was originally something that was used by King Solomon, and it was never a bad thing. It was something that represented the 5 senses that God gave you. The 5 senses, that God gave you: sense, hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch. So these are the senses that God gave you, and that's what the pentagram stood for. In the late 1900s, that changed, and it was used for satanic purposes. But, well, let's talk about it like this. The pentagram. Originally for what the census God gave you. After Christ died, the Christians used it to represent the 5 wounds of Christ. The piercing to the side, the piercing in the hands, the piercing in the feet. So that was what the pentagram was used for. You fast forward hundreds of years later, and now it's something that's used for satanic purposes, which is complete bullshit to me. But so yeah, now that we got some literature for you to read out of the way, like definitely people have heard the story of Dracula, but if you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it's different than what you've heard or what you've seen on TV. So it's a book that's recommended, that we recommend you to read. Alexandria recommends you to read Bram Stoker's Dracula, because even though you've seen the movie, it'll be different than what you've read. I recommend you looking into the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe. He was a short story writer, although people, because he did Gothic Romanticism, people look at him as just being just a poet, and he is the second greatest poet that ever existed. And people stop picking out The Fucking Raven as your favorite poem. There's other poems, and so he had a lot of poems. Why don't you look into those and research him? Now we can fast forward to movies. But before I want to do that, I want to have a little debate. Here's the debate. Why is it, here's a question for everybody out there. Why is it that everybody, male and female, can sit together and they can watch a movie, like let's say a Dracula film, just for instance, that's starring like a Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise or whoever, I don't know. So let's say you got a Dracula movie and nobody complains. Both male and female sit together, they watch the movie, and it's all good. But then comes along a Dracula movie that's got a lead as a female. Why all of a sudden does the women have a hard time watching it? Can you answer that question, Alexandra?
I mean, I can't answer that question for the masses out there, but I mean, I can just put it into perspective that, and I may stand corrected. All you women may get angry at me, but I'm going to say my perspective on this topic is that, I'm going to use Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, the lead actor that plays Dracula, he's not my favorite actor. I don't really care for any other movie that he's in. He's not a very good-looking actor in my mind.
What are you talking about?
Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman's a damn good actor. Gary Oldman's playing a Batman. Hey, I know I'm going off subject here, but Gary Oldman.
I'm talking about from the sexual perspective. Yes, he's a good actor. He's in a lot of movies. He's in The Fifth Element. He's in I think the movie The Queen. He's a good character actor, but for sex appeal, I mean, I think it's just the way that Francis Ford Coppola did Dracula. He really stuck to the Victorian feel of the grit and the grime, and the way that he's historically dressed.
Let's don't lose context to my question.
But I'm just saying that's why to us, in our minds, it's been implanted that Dracula is a sexual predator with strength. I know you're going to rip me apart in a few minutes before you rip me to shreds. That it's from a sexual nature, written in the Victorian times, where men were women were submissive. I know you're going to scream at me. Where the figure was somebody that would ravage you, suck your blood, and would be a male.
No. You're trying
so we're a predator.
You're trying to put it into a time of period.
Because that's when the film was supposed to be made.
I know, but the question that I had is, why is it that women can watch a movie, not just Dracula, but any movie? I'll give you an example. An action film. Why is it that women we'll take it from horror and send it to action, can watch an action film that stars men, and the male and female can watch it and have no problem with it. But the minute that you have Selma Hayek in an action film, all of a sudden it becomes an issue, and you like her, and you just want to watch it because of her, but when in actuality it becomes it's a good movie. Why is that?
You know what? You kind of left me speechless. I've got to pick my words wisely here. I've got to make my choice wisely because women really they feel, I think in some forms women feel threatened because they think that this particular actress is maybe a fantasy of their husband or their boyfriends, and they feel inadequate because, I mean, a lot of these actresses, their face is perfect, their hair is perfect, their body's perfect for the movie, and we feel that we can't compete, and we feel inadequate and towards our partner. I mean, that's deep rooted in regards
a deep
to
psychological
no,
issue.
it's self-image. It's self-image.
But it's a movie. I mean, if you can watch a movie with Sylvester Stallone or Vin Diesel or whoever in it, but then you can't watch one same type of movie with Salma Hayek or whoever in it, and that's just one example. But there's other, like I don't even like Angelina Jolie, but I put out there Angelina Jolie. She did action film talk.
She's a good actress. I like her movies.
I
think she's very beautiful. She's very talented, gritty.
But why can't you, or not just you? I'm talking about in general speaking. Why can't women enjoy a film that stars a leading lady? Women bitch and complain all the time. There's not a lot of films out there with leading ladies, and I think the reason is the minute that the man wants to watch the film, all of a sudden, oh, you like her, you want to be with her, and all this stuff.
It all goes down to self-image because
But the men don't have it when they watch movies like Sylvester Stallone, when Sylvester Stallone's in it, or Dolph Lundgren, or Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I can only answer it from my personal.
Okay.
It's about self-image, and you feel that because in Hollywood, the face is perfect, the hair is perfect, the body's perfect, and we all know that in real life there is no perfection. I mean, there's Photoshop. They do all these different things on the editing of the films. So I mean, in reality, people just get threatened, and I mean, they just feel insecure because the man is drooling over a woman that completely is unrealistic perfect. That's my opinion.
It's funny because we got different ideas of what perfect is, or like for me, like there's people out there for me, like I look up to, and I say, man, those people are cool, or they got a look that I like to have, like Rich Piana, Mike Ness, or Lee Priest, or people like that. But you look at the same people and you say, oh, they're ugly. And so, but we look at them, men look at these people and they say, oh man, they're cool. Like, we'd like to be like that.
Okay, but that's a different, that's ingrained through social and through the times. I mean, it's just the way society has, and it's unfair how society has taught us. And this is more for women, that if your hair isn't perfect, your makeup isn't perfect, you're going to be alone the rest of your life. And that's wrong.
Yeah, that is wrong.
That's very wrong. And especially with young teenage girls about weight issues. We have anorexia, bulimia. Hollywood really paints an inaccurate picture of what beautiful is. To me, I don't think a woman that looks like a toothpick is beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think a woman that looks like a toothpick is beautiful either. I mean, I just don't. But what so anyway, there's the question. Y'all can debate it with us. Ask your spouse or look into your life if you feel more comfortable watching a movie or a television show that stars men versus women. I'll give you some. I'll change some perspectives for people out there on me. Like, there's some shows that I like to watch that I'm pretty sure Alexandria would not like to watch.
I thought we weren't going to touch on this.
No. I'm just saying, just like for me, like years ago, I used to watch a show, and for those of you that know, it's called Jersey-Licious. Jersey-Licious. Very out of character for me to watch a show like that, but I was.
Why did you watch it?
It's a very good show. That's what I was about to say.
Okay.
Now, she anytime she goes, she's thinking, oh yeah, it's for the girls, whatever. But no, it was actually a good show. For anybody that have ever seen the show Jersey-Licious, it was one of the earlier reality shows, and it was a very good show. I actually liked it.
And what's one of the shows that you think that I like that you wouldn't watch? Let's flip it. What's your opinion?
Shows that you like,
or movies, or anything that I like.
Oh, you like anything Russell Crowe. So anything Russell Crowe, you just like drooling. And that's just crazy to me. So
no, I don't drool. I'll clarify that to everybody out there. He's a good character actor. I wouldn't drool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I really wouldn't drool. So there you go.
But the thing is, like, I can watch a Russell Crowe movie. But
you watched one that you said that you were impressed with the storyline. I can't remember what the story was. I was asleep when you were watching it that time. Was it Cinderella Man, the boxing one? I don't know. You said
I don't remember actually. But, yeah.
but I was asleep and you ended up watching the movie. You said, and you took me to a movie on my birthday.
Yeah, it was a Russell Crowe movie.
That with Ryan Gosling, I think.
But however, if there was a Sybil Danning movie out there, I can guarantee you I'd catch so much hell.
No, that's I stand corrected. We watched The Howling, and that was I love The Howling. That's a horror, like a series of movies that because of the werewolf, I love every one of them. And she was in there. She's actually the lead werewolf or whatever.
Yeah,
of the
but
pack.
I mean, you like Egypt, and I tried to like put on a very Egyptian story that I thought would be appropriate to watch. And
the props weren't that great, and that's what
it was. The props from the 30s. It was the same.
I don't like movies because they can't portray it. In my mind, as a historian, I have an idea of what I think Egypt looks like, and if people don't do the props, it's hard for me to watch the movie, and I expressed that to him. But we're going to move on to what now?
We're going to move on to talking about early horror films. Okay, now we're getting into the film section of the podcast here. What I like to say is the very first horror film ever made, and I'm going to give you a second to think about this. Who was the very first horror filmmaker out there? Let's count it down. 3, 2, 1.
You know.
Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was the very first horror filmmaker. And then what film did he do? We talked about it earlier. He did the Frankenstein film. Okay, and he was not only was he the very first horror filmmaker out there, but he was also the very first pornographer. Now this may be shocking to some of y'all, but Google it. Thomas Edison, yes, your inventor, also did pornography. That's just a fact. That's the way it is. He did horror and pornography, and so I'm not lying. Google it. Check it out. So if we touch back on it. Frankenstein, Thomas A. Edison. What the hell does the A stand for?
I don't know if it's Elvis. I'm not quite.
Elvis.
Avis. I don't know if it's
I don't know what the hell the A stands for, but yeah, he was the first one. So what's one of your earlier horror films that you like?
Well, the earliest horror film that I like, and again, is with Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, and that was in 1931. But I think a lot of you need to know that the first motion picture to actually feature the character of Dracula was Dracula's Death, and it was actually produced in Hungary in 1921, and it's now considered a now lost film. So if anybody could get their hands on that Dracula's Death from 1921, that would be very, very innovative because it's now considered lost forever. And another one was F.W. Moran's unauthorized film adaptation of Nosferatu, was actually released in 1922. So again, my favorite Dracula was with Bela Lugosi, and that was 1931. That was the beginning, and then we also had Christopher Lee actually as the title character in Dracula 1958. But Bela Lugosi to me is the all-time. Nobody plays Count Dracula like Bela Lugosi.
And now when you're talking about Bela Lugosi, I'm going to mention another film for y'all. I'm going to ask y'all a trivia question. A lot of people, when you talk about zombies, a lot of people, again, I hate when people give uneducated answers to questions, okay? What was the very first zombie film ever released? Everybody I've asked that question to has said The Night of the Living Dead. Why answer the fucking question if you do not know the answer? Okay? The very first mainstream, mass-produced horror film that featured zombies that was ever released was not Night of the Living Dead. What it was White Zombie. White Zombie, the lead actor was Bela Lugosi.
That's amazing. And something.
And it came out in 1932.
And here's another piece of historical film trivia for you. In 1958, the British film company Hammer Film Productions. They actually, and I'm assuming tonight's going to be an awesome night because one of their successes was The Curse of Frankenstein, and that's with Peter Cushing. and that's going to be on TV for us tonight. So I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, and I know it's not Dracula, but it's the Hammer Film Productions actually had released Dracula for the previous year prior to the Curse of Frankenstein, and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing have worked together several times. Christopher Lee, of course, as Dracula, and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, and they reprised their role multiple times over the next decade and a half, including The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, etc., etc., and then in 1977, the BBC made Count Dracula, which was a 155-minute adaptation for television starring Louis Jourdan. But again, then we move into 1992 was Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring, of course, Gary Oldman. And then we have such titles.
Well, I mean,
I'm just giving the time frame of all these Dracula films.
Okay, go ahead.
And then we have Dracula's Daughter. We have The Brides of Dracula. And as of 2009, an estimated 217 films featuring Dracula as a major role, and that was only second only to Sherlock Holmes. So at that time frame in 2009, there had been 217 films featuring Dracula, but the Sherlock Holmes had 223. So that says a lot about the character of Dracula.
I didn't hear you mention Abbott and Costello and Three Stooges in there with Dracula, because as we know, in the 30s, when these big horror films were out there, and you had the big three, which was Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and the guy that played the Wolfman, what the hell was his name?
Lon Chaney.
We do know that the Three Stooges would feature these characters, so Dracula was in the Three Stooges, and Dracula was in Abbott and Costello, and so was Frankenstein. But so I want to recommend some horror movies for y'all. I don't want to go through the history of Frankenstein. I'm not going to sit there and do that, because there's a lot of movies and there's a lot of things that you can skip if we just look at the unit, because there's different companies that produce it. You got Universal, you got independent companies, you got things of that nature. If you just Google it and pull up one thing, you're going to skip a lot of shit, because it's not going to tell you some of the independent films or the television stuff. So I'm going to skip out on mentioning the Frankenstein filmography there, or whatever you want to call it, the list of movies with Frankenstein in it. But for the original Frankenstein, I definitely like to recommend for people. Boris Karloff played Frankenstein. Very good movie. Am I correct? Right.
Another movie that I would really like to recommend, and as of recently, just a couple months ago, I watched this again, and it's the original Mummy that was released in 1932, and this is Universal Studios, starring Boris Karloff, Zita Zohan, and this film again is about the ancient Egyptian mummy. Word is the mummy is Imhotep, and if you step forward now into the Mummy and the Mummy Returns with Brendan Fraser, they still use the Egyptian mummy Imhotep coming back to life. But my favorite version again is the Universal Studios The Mummy 1932 by Boris Karloff.
Yeah, and if you look at from 1930 to 1933, that's when you had Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, and the Wolfman, the four main franchises there. And the thing about it is, with Boris Karloff, not only did he play the Mummy, but he also played Frankenstein. And so, and a lot of them interchanged anyway. I know that Lon Chaney also played the Mummy, didn't he?
In one of the films too. Yeah, they interchanged these particular actors, and I think Universal Studios at that time in the 30s really brought these monsters to everybody's forefront, and that's when they became truly famous. And horror and these monsters were actually cool.
That was the golden age, really. I don't know. That was the best time for horror, was from the early 30s. The best time for horror. And
but talking about horror too, my second favorite movie of all time was King Kong with Fay Wray. That wasn't made
I
in
thought
the
that
30s.
was an action adventure.
Well, that's still a horror because it's a monster. King Kong is considered really a monster. I sort of consider that on the fringes of horror action adventure because
Fay Wray?
Fay Wray.
Fay Wray, yeah, she was one of the original Scream Queens because of that movie. But she did other movies too.
But that movie, to me, with the Beast, he's considered the Beast, almost like Beauty and the Beast. I think that's where Beauty and the Beast, Walt Disney took that from King Kong. Because to me, it's such a... I could watch King Kong, the original one, over and over because it has all the elements of, Beauty and the Beast, horror, action, love, and everything. And, we have to really dissect it, that a lot of these horror movies, using The Mummy 1932 as an example, brings horror, love, and sexuality together because this living mummy stalks a beautiful woman that he believes is his reincarnation of his lover. So these horror encompasses all these elements. And today, horror movies, there is love, there's sex, there's horror, all these ingredients that I think are key to whip up an essential hit horror film. And you're a horror film director yourself, maybe you can add on to some of those key ingredients that the audience find very, very appealing.
Well, before I talk about my movies, I want to keep recommending some other movies for people out there. And I think that Rabid was a film that was made in, I think, late 70s, early 80s, and it starred Marilyn Chambers. It's a very good movie. It was shot in England. And I think it was a very good movie. Let me see there. So I recommend Rabid in The Case of the Full Moon Murders. Now, Ron Milkey and Sean Cunningham is trying desperately to hide from y'all The Case of the Full Moon Murders. If you can find it, and you can on the internet, why don't you go ahead and get it? Because they're trying to make that movie disappear. And if you're into B horror movies, that's actually a damn good movie. They want to make it disappear because, as we know, they kicked off the Friday the 13th franchise and Last House on the Left, so they don't really like it.
And another movie that I'm a huge werewolf fan too, so I think American Werewolf in London is a cult classic for all you werewolf fans, along with The Howling as well. And I mean, who couldn't mention a classic horror movie than The Shining with Jack Nicholson?
Yeah, The Shining with Jack Nicholson. I want to talk a little bit about that after I get done with Rabid here. Rabid was filmed in 1977. It's a Canadian-American horror film. And it starred Marilyn Chambers. And I consider it... I'm going to tell you how much I like the movie, okay? Back in 2009, the only way that I could buy the movie was $50 for the DVD. $50. I paid $50 to get the damn movie. And so Rabid is definitely a good movie. So I recommend that. And what did I just say I was going to come back to?
The Shining.
The Shining. The Shining. Okay, interesting fact about The Shining. Guess who did not like The Shining? Stephen King. He didn't like The Shining with Jack Nicholson. He was actually pissed off about it a little bit. And I'll tell you why he was pissed off about it. He was pissed off about it because it doesn't follow the book at the end there with the maze and stuff like that. He really thought that was important, and they cut it out. They just made like a shrubbery maze, but it was different than what was written in the book. If you read Stephen King's book, The Shining, it's the shrubs are actually like animals. So the shrubbery was animals. So Stephen King pushed and pushed and pushed, and about 10 to 15 years later, I don't know the exact time frame, but he actually had a television show produced to his liking with a different actor. Didn't have Jack Nicholson in it. It was not as popular as the one with Jack Nicholson, but it was to the fact that it pleased the author because it followed the important parts that Stephen King thought was very important for the book.
What about fairly recently you watched that TV series by Stephen King, The Storm of the Century? What did you think of that one? I mean, that's...
Well, shit, I can't remember it.
That's when that guy...
I can't remember.
It's based on the legend from Roanoke Island about that guy coming and all these town people turn on each other because they're all sinners.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That was a good movie, yeah. That was a damn good movie. They were all sinners and there was only one good... I don't want to give away the plot of the movie. But yeah, that was a good movie, but... I like this. I like to think that, too, you had the 30s as being a great decade for horror, and I like to think the other decade for horror would be the 80s. And if you're looking into the 80s, I'd say not even just the 80s. I'd say from 77 to 1987. So that 10-year period was the greatest years for horror, because what franchises did you have kick off then? You had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you had Halloween, you had Friday the 13th, and you had Nightmare on Elm Street, and I mean, then you had Hellraiser, you had Puppet Master, and things of that nature.
What about House on Haunted Hill? That was in the 90s.
That was a remake of a film.
Of the original.
And I like the original better, actually, than the remake.
And then we have movies like The Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino in there. That I thought that was a really, really good movie. I don't know if you've seen that.
I'm trying to stick in the decade right now.
This is the 90s.
77 to 87.
Okay.
And so is there any movies in that time period that you'd like to recommend for the people? Because, the 90s, I don't know, it didn't produce a lot of good horror films in the 90s.
Well, I mean, I was always into Puppet Master, what's the other one? With Pinhead and all that kind of stuff. Hellraiser. Those were cult classics, and I could watch them over and over again. I mean, everybody, when you think about that, I mean, that's just the classics.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to pick franchises, and I'm going to pick the best movie from the franchise, and I'm going to recommend it to y'all if y'all want to go see it or not, okay? Let's take the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, okay? Everybody likes the first one. Okay, and I think if you haven't seen the first one, you should definitely watch it. I like the second one. I like the second one with Dennis Hopper. I thought it was a really good movie. So I'd recommend you watch the second one from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. From the Halloween franchise, okay? You definitely have to see the first one. The first one was what did it for me. It started my obsession, if you will, with Jamie Lee Curtis. Because when I seen that movie, I was, I think I was only 6 years old when I seen Halloween. And so for some reason at 6 years old, I had an immediate crush on Jamie Lee Curtis. I don't know. Maybe it's because she was trying to protect the kids in the movie from Michael Myers, and she was the ultimate babysitter, So I recommend the first one in the original franchise, not the reboot franchise, but in the original franchise, I recommend the first one. But then again, I think it was in the 90s when H2O came out, and I like that one in the franchise as well, and that's in the original franchise. In Friday the 13th, my favorite Friday the 13th film is Part 7. Just Part 7, that's when Kane Hodder comes in and he plays Jason Voorhees, and man, that thing is just wicked. I like Part 6 too, but Part 6 got a lot of popularity in the 80s because of Alice Cooper writing the theme song for the film. But Part 7 is just when it took a whole darker spin, and it's just a damn good movie. Nightmare on Elm Street. I'd have to say the first one. So
some of the, some of my favorite movies that were in the 80s, which I watched The Fly. I was interested in movies like The Fly. I was also, again, American Werewolf in London. The Poltergeist. That's when Poltergeist came out in 1982. I was interested in that. I also like the Alien series again. I enjoyed The Lost Boys about vampires. That was in 1987. So many movies again. The Howling series. The first movie was in 1981. I really, really enjoyed those. There were so many Stephen King movies that came out too. Scanners. Actually enjoyed Scanners. Children of the Corn came out in 1984. That was something that I really, really enjoyed. So many movies came out in the 80s. Stephen King's Cujo about the rabid dog, that came out in 1983. I love that movie. I watched Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead, it was in 1988. That was good. And Fright Night. That movie I watched over and over. That's the original Fright Night. I forget what the name is. Roddy McDowall was in Fright Night. I really like that series. There's just so many good movies that came out in the 80s that you could just list on and on.
And the Howling franchise, Howling Part 2 was the best one. It had Sybil Danning. Not just because of that, but also had Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee played in some of the original, not the original Dracula films, but the original Dracula, not the original guy, why I keep saying it. The Dracula films from the 60s and the 70s. and he played in a lot of Dracula films in there.
And then, and then another one that came out is the Pet Sematary, Stephen King. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. Not of all the movies, because some of the movies haven't been done what I think are good. The original Fog came out. That's another movie that I'm a huge fan. I actually own the original Fog.
Jamie Lee Curtis is in that movie as well.
And that's right. And Adrienne Barbeau is in there, and she plays the lady that runs the radio station out of the lighthouse. That movie rocks. I think I actually own that movie because that's how good that movie is. So I really enjoy that. Again, so many. The Hellraiser, The Thing came out. Gremlins, I was a huge fan of all the Gremlins when they came out. They were such a hit. And of course we know that The Shining came out in 1980. So these are some of the cult classic movies that the 80s brought to us in the format of genre of horror movies.
So, you were asking me about formulas for films, because I made my very first film in 2008, okay? And it's a funny story. My first film is called Timothy Mark Presents Chains. It's my very first film that I shot, and I recognized quickly the formula that you needed for a film. Nudity and violence. That's the formula. You throw those two things in there. That's Victor Miller, who did some Friday the 13th work. He always says put the machete and titties in the movie, and then you got the great formula right there. But what I decided to do, if you watch my film, was I use perception. When Ron Milkey watched my film in 2008, he calls me up and he says, "Why in the hell did you shoot a porn?" But that's how he perceived it to be. Because if you watch the film, it's not a porn at all. It's none of the girls. I think I've only got one tit shot in the film. I think it's only one tit shot, and I got a ball shot from the leading actor. I got his nutsack from the back, but that was completely on accident. We did not tell him to do that. When we were filming, he actually came straight out of his underwear. The camera guy actually fell over. It was a very funny moment in the filming process. But and I think that's why people perceive it as being a porn when it's not. It's a lot of sexuality, a lot of perceived sexuality in the film, and that's what I was going for. And it's a lot of violence in the film. And so, actually, it's funny that Ron was to say that, because Friday the 13th, the very first film that other franchise that Ron was in, had more nudity in it than my film, Chains. So, yeah.
And I think before we kind of end up this movie genre, I know we're jumping back to the 70s, and I think a lot of you will probably say, why didn't they mention this movie? We have to... I think the scariest movie that actually made me want to sleep with my lights on for quite a while was The Exorcist. And The Exorcist was in 1973. And I think for that time frame in the 70s, I think that was a very... that's an early, horror movie that scared, let's face it, scared the crap out of a lot of us. And another one that I'm going to bring to the forefront that scared the crap out of me was the original Jaws. The original Jaws was in 1975, and I will never forget, I watched that film, and I think within the next couple of months, my parents and I, we took a trip to Nova Scotia, and that was the ocean. I had never seen the ocean before, and my dad was a swimmer. I've always been a swimmer since a young age, and my dad was actually pissed off. He said, "We drove all the way to the ocean and you don't want to get into the goddamn ocean." I had just seen Jaws, and there was no way in hell I was going to go swimming, because I thought Jaws was going to come and eat me. And that's how horror can implant these ideas in your psyche and your mind to say, it took me a long time. And I had wanted to go to the ocean so bad, and there was no way in hell. My dad was pissed off for a long time. We take this kid all the way to the ocean, and and it was hard because like I said, I learned to swim at a very, very young age. I'm a good swimmer, and I was petrified to the point where I just ruined it for the family vacation.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine not wanting to get in the water after seeing that film. It's kind of like Psycho, not wanting to get into the shower after seeing Psycho. Psycho, the very first Psycho, damn good movie. That's another one I recommend for y'all out there. So out of all the Jaws movies, which one did you think was the best?
to me, it was the original Jaws movie. That one I could watch over and over. The other ones, I mean, how many times can you do a shark movie or a electronic shark chomping on these people? To me, like even when I love the scene where when the first victim, you know, they're having a party on the beach. It's really in the 70s with, you know, this hip retro clothing. The woman, they were drinking, maybe smoking up or whatever, but she takes all of her clothes off, and they have the shot of her running into the ocean nude, and then of course she's the first shark victim. So it's just incorporating horror with sensuality, sexual nature, and I think it really it makes it more horrific because it shows people as true human beings, and then, you know, something awful happens to them. And like Timothy said, horror can implant all these subconscious thoughts in our minds. We're afraid to look under the bed. We're afraid to open the closet door. So a true horror movie is doing its job properly if it makes you think these things or want to sleep with your lights on for a month straight.
Yeah, and The Exorcist, that has some good special effects. I didn't know it was 73 when that movie came out.
Yeah, 1973.
Yeah, it has some good special effects. I thought it was a good film. And actually, the true story of The Exorcist is it was not a little girl, it was a boy. And that kid's alive today. The guy's actually alive still today.
But if I'm not mistaken, I think that movie, The Exorcist, made a lot of people rethink what was going on with possession, and I think it maybe brought the topic of being possessed and how the church handles it. It kind of maybe opened the avenues into mainstream that this stuff really happens, because prior to that movie, like, did we really hear about people getting possessed all the time? I don't think so. I mean, that's my opinion, but I don't know.
It was like after that movie you started hearing more about it.
People coming forward.
Well, then you have Amityville Horror.
We forgot that movie, the original Amityville Horror. That was to me, I love that movie.
Yeah, I like the original Amityville Horror. Yeah. It. What about It? What year did It come out?
Oh, please.
Since you with all the dates over there, what year did It come out?
Don't talk about It, because my youngest son, Nicholas, became obsessed with that movie, and I had to finally order that movie online, because I could not find this movie. And that's a Stephen King, right? It? About a clown?
Yeah, it's a Stephen King movie about a clown.
And that scared the crap out of a lot of people that thought clowns were these happy birthday party, making everybody laugh and all these parades. And it gave a whole new spin on how people looked at clowns. Like I said, I have my own personal story with my son demanding that I find that movie and having marathons. And I think maybe another even touching on horror, well, it's more sci-fi, but it scared my son, was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because it had some horror aspects, but it's more sci-fi on it. But that was how these movies kind of make us rethink everyday things. And I think as soon as you consider It, I've never looked at a clown the same way. I can tell you that.
It came out in 1990, but I will say that in the 80s there was a movie that came out that was probably influenced It, which was Funhouse. And Funhouse is a damn good movie. If you go on and watch that one, it's about a carnival. These kids go to this carnival and they get basically terrorized and murdered and things of that nature. But it's called the Funhouse. Good film.
And there was a time too where all these horror movies took place in these college fraternities. I don't know, I can't remember some names, but a lot of murders and all these things with college students and fraternity. You have these women that are scantily dressed and screaming with alcohol, and that was just a good concoction at that time frame.
I think that was more of 90s. Back in the fraternity houses and the horror movies back in the 50s, like the werewolf in the dormitory and things of that nature. But and you had them in the 60s too. But then that kind of dropped off in the 70s and the 80s. Except when you got in the 80s, you had the cheerleader massacre and the sorority house slaughter and stuff like that. But it came back, I think, more in the 90s with the college stuff.
I think we could go on and on about horror movies. There's probably a lot of them that you maybe say, how come they didn't say this one? But drop us a line. Send us an email. What your favorite horror movie is.
We're not done.
But you were going to talk about music. Well, go ahead. I've been waiting for you to talk about music.
Warren Zevon's Werewolf and Werewolves in London. What about that one?
I had that on. You programmed that on my phone. I must have burnt out my phone listening to. I really really like that song. It's really classic.
What about Bobby Boris Pickett, Monster Mash?
You know what? We used to have Halloween parties for the kids, and that at that time it was a little record, and I think we must have burnt that out because we replayed it. That's anybody around Halloween or having parties at school or a personal Halloween party. I mean, who hasn't played that? That's just a classic. It's not Halloween without playing that.
Yeah. So you have the People Purple Eater. I don't know who sung that one, but that was considered a horror / alien song back in the day.
And what about you said we like watching the Munsters? What about you said about Grandpa's car? What was that music about that?
Rob Zombie did a song called Dracula, and if you watch the Munsters, you know that Grandpa's car is called Dracula. It's called Dracula. That's the name of his car, and so his race car. And so Rob Zombie did a song about Dracula. That was pretty good.
Mm-hmm. What other kind of things you're going to touch on in regards to horror? I mean, are you talking about with horror movies, TV, or?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you talk the man behind the mask, Alice Cooper from Friday the 13th Part 6. So that's one.
Well, what about you're talking about the man behind the mask? Right away, people I know. One of my friends is going to say, "Why didn't you mention?" I mean, Phantom of the Opera was a horror movie. They actually did that in the 1970s. Who was that playing?
They did a remake in the 80s. Actually, the guy that played Robert Englund, got to play Freddy Krueger, played it in the 80s. The remake, it was.
But the original Phantom of the Opera, that was a real, very.
I don't know who played that one.
Sensual, but I remember watching that movie and I thought, holy smokes, this is an awesome movie because it gave a different take on, Phantom of the Opera has been remade over and over again, but the one, I'm almost positive it was in the 70s when that one was made. And what about Rocky Horror Picture
Well,
Show?
I mean, that was more of a comedy horror. Yeah, you got comedy horrors. That's, so I think it was a horror for Meatloaf at the time because he did not, actually the one that you're talking about, Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
I found the date on this, 1943. It was a Universal
What?
horror film. Yeah. They may have had one in the 70s, but...
yeah, I think there was one in the 70s.
But the original one was 1943, Phantom of the Opera. I like Robert Englund's Phantom of the Opera. I thought that was really good because I am a Robert Englund fan. And so, but if you type in... If you just go search like comedy horror, there's a lot of good comedy horrors out there. Like, but yeah. So Phantom of the Opera, we definitely recommend. There was another one. It was a funny one, The Burbs with Tom Hanks. You seen The Burbs with Tom Hanks?
No.
You did see The Burbs.
Oh, I did? Okay, I must have did. Yes, sorry.
Let me just put out there another debate. You can easily tell when you're having a conversation with somebody and they just they're not really listening.
Excuse me?
If the question is a yes or no answer and they throw out a yes or no, they hoping that there's a 50% chance that they're going to be right and then you're going to ignore the fact that they did not hear you.
Psychology with Timothy.
You've seen The Burbs.
I'm a master. Okay.
I know that you've seen it with Tom Hanks. I really like that movie. That was a funny movie to me. So.
Well, what's that other movie that I forget the name of it? It has Randy Quaid in it where they're cannibals and they serve neighbors human beings. There was a movie for the life of me I cannot. I
do not remember.
That was
I don't think I've ever seen that damn movie.
They actually serve up for dinner is people that they've killed and chopped up, and they think nothing of it.
Well, yeah, a cannibal wouldn't think nothing of it. I don't.
What about your book?
Cannibal Fever.
That's
My
right.
book, Cannibal Fever, yeah. Television shows, The Monsters. I mean, if you get a chance, I know you've probably seen it and you say, oh, that's black and white. I don't really want to see that. I've seen it when I was a kid. Go back and watch it. Them things are funny.
Or the TV series, we have the DVD here, Dark Shadows. You all know the Dark Shadows movie with Johnny Depp, where we're talking about the original black and white TV series.
Or Dracula's Widow. Dracula's Widow. Now, that's a Dracula movie starring a female. But the minute that you say, like, oh, you just want to watch it because of the chick. No, if you go to the store and you're looking for a Dracula film and the only Dracula film there is called Dracula's Widow, why would you have an objection to watching it?
I wouldn't have an objection. I didn't. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, he just likes to tease me on that fact that I get all upset or I get all crushed.
Willard. Willard was a movie about rats, and it's a remake actually, and I think the remake came out maybe in the 90s at some point, but that's a good horror film too, Willard.
Yeah, I watched Willard too.
And it stars Kim McCamey in it. She's a dark-haired actress. Kim McCamey. Google that name. But okay.
Okay, why would we need to Google that name? Is she?
She's been in a lot of horror movies. She was
Okay.
in Evil Laugh and things like that. And see now, why would we need to Google that name? I just threw it out there. Like, what's the problem?
There's no problem.
Okay.
You're making it a problem. But you were going to talk about more music, or are you done with your music?
Yeah, I guess I'm done. I mean, we've kind of went over a little bit today on the podcast, but so time flies when you're having a conversation. I hope people, you can email us at World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com. Let me slow this down for people. World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com if you want to email us any more movies we should have talked about. But yeah, I guess that's going to be it for today, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of decided, and this may change, that Saturday podcast is going to be sort of different, uncuffed, sort of everyday stuff that's going to touch on some of the stuff that we do. So, we like to discuss movies, literature, and it all comes back to paranormal, horror, and all that kind of stuff. It's all related because it is a huge, huge topic that I don't think you could ever run out of things to talk about.
Yep, and I think the next podcast, on the next episode, we're going to solely talk about Frankenstein. And so,
I mean, we'll be able to
go really in depth with it.
That's right. And like I said, tonight I'm kind of looking forward to The Curse of Frankenstein being on tonight. And to me, I can't. I'm almost positive I've seen it, but it's been quite a while.
So that's it for us today. I recommend 2 books for you if you're into vampirism or whatever like that. Vlad the Impaler, The Christian Warrior by Timothy Mark, me, and Alexandria's book, The Blood Countess. Go online, Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, and get your copy today.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.